All
right, here we go, gang.
Oh, what? And we're off.
Yes.
All right.
Notes.
Here's the beginning of like the meat of macroeconomics. We sort of have been understanding some vocab like GDP, inflation, unemployment. We did a little bit of micro fundamental economics, where we heard the word opportunity cost. We looked at production possibility curve, and we looked at supply and demand. The first major macro idea is going to continue with us for like the rest of the semester. This fundamental graph. The horizontal axis is GDP. How much is produced? And then we have aggregate demand. All the demand curves for all of the things added together. This vertical axis is the price level. If the price level is low, people can afford more. Price level is high, people can afford less. Similar story goes for aggregate supply. Aggregate demand is, or consists of, the same components as GDP. Consumption, business investment, government spending, and net exports. We're going to focus less on net exports and more on these three pieces. When official GDP calculations are presented, distributed, whatever, growth is expected from quarter to quarter or year to year. And the idea is, how do we increase or grow GDP? So, the main way we're going to focus on, at least the first half of today, is shifting aggregate demand. I missed calling this the original GDP and the initial price level. The shifter of aggregate demand we're going to spend most time talking about today are our fiscal policies. Fiscal policies are laws. Fiscal policies are laws that are passed that impact consumption, business investment, government spending, or net import or net exports.
Mm-hmm.
The simplest is direct government spending. We're going to increase our presence in like another country. We need more boats. We need more airplanes. We need better drones and so forth and so on. Or this is true in like 2009, 2010, during the recovery from the Great Recession. We're going to start some public works programs, better roads, better train tracks, better infrastructure, better bridges, and the government decides that they're going to spend. It's not necessarily the federal government. It could be that Pennsylvania says we're going to repave all of the highways. If we want to increase aggregate demand, and the government wants to increase consumption, you can lower taxes. The government lowers taxes, people have more money to spend. The government could provide incentives for businesses to invest. One of the policies by President Trump was to allow companies to take profits that they were holding overseas, and it's called repatriate them, bring them back into the country. So Apple has subsidiaries in Europe and China and South America. It keeps profits in those smaller companies. It doesn't bring it back to the U.S. because the U.S. had and has, I think still, one of the highest business tax rates. So if they lowered business taxes on profits, if they incentivized research and development, building new facilities or new whatever machines or whatever, that would increase business investment. Mickey had a little hand halfway up.
Just going back to the graph.
Perfect.
So if I'm looking at the first aggregate demand, decreasing slope one, is that saying that if the price was at the price level thing was at the top, does that mean the GDP is really low, but the aggregate demand is high? If you put a point.
It means at a super high price level, people don't want to consume or cannot consume very much.
Right. So it's not. So how is that how is that affecting GDP?
So that's not even.
Well, then
so
why is the
sort of-
GDP on the x-axis?
Let me answer your first question, and then I'll answer that. So remember, these are all combinations of, even if you think back to quantity and price from last class, those are all just combinations. If the price level is super high, people cannot afford very much. But remember that this equilibrium point is where the actual GDP comes from.
Okay.
If the price level was super duper high, people would not be able to afford things.
No, I know. I totally get that. I'm just, if you put a point right there and you can
Price
and you put a quantity $100 is the price level, what's on the x?
GDP
Right.
output.
Yeah, no, but why would the GDP be low?
Because people do not demand. This is you can think of this as output as well. The last week it was quantity output.
Okay. Okay.
If cars went to be $1 billion a piece, we wouldn't produce many cars. We wouldn't want many cars. Car companies would be super pumped to produce things, but no one would want them.
What's the proprietor in all this? What's the starting kind of pioneering agent? That's is it the price level or is it
It's not a function with an input and an output. It's just a combination.
Okay.
If the price level is super low, people can afford a lot of things.
Okay.
And the big idea is when buyers and suppliers agree. at this price, we want that many things. Good? That's like the fundamental piece. Aggregate supply is upward sloping because of what's called sticky wages. Sticky, like it doesn't move very freely. If automakers in Detroit are signed to 10-year contracts through like their union, and the price of cars goes way up, companies are going to be able or want to sell a lot of them because their cost of producing them is not going way up because it's a set contract for how much they're paying the workers. If Apple signs a contract with whoever makes the glass touchscreens, then if the price of iPhones goes way up, that's awesome for Apple because they have a set price for one of those inputs. Yeah.
What are sticky wages?
Sticky wages are just when there's like a contract set and they don't move freely. So pretty soon we're going to find out Manny Machado and Bryce Harper, they're both going to sign these super long baseball contracts. And that wage is going to be set for a long time. And if all of a sudden baseball teams start making billions of dollars because there's some new technology that we don't even know about, like some virtual reality that makes watching baseball awesome or something, and players earn like hundreds of $millions a year, their contract is set. This happened in 2010, 11, 12 with automakers. All of a sudden, the union had negotiated like $100 an hour for auto workers. The demand for cars went way down, and car companies like couldn't pay the wages, so they let people go. They couldn't renegotiate and be like, oh, will you take like $80? Will you take a different amount? Because it was set like from the union of what the wages would be. Those are two examples of like sticky wages. And even like teacher, we're on a year-to-year contract. If something happened right now, it wouldn't be until next September that there's like different wages. Little baby question from somewhere over here. So I can go about this time.
Just saying, like, that works both ways.
Yeah.
If, say, like, the cars are not getting sold, and the price drops, they're still going to get paid.
Yeah, the problem though for both of those scenarios is it's sort of not good for workers.
So are teachers' wages sticky wages because they can move like at intervals?
Yeah, but I would say almost everybody has sticky wages. It takes a while. The idea here, and you'll see because it connects to the next concept, the idea is that as the price level changes, do wages change in the exact same ratio? So if the price of everything doubled, Starbucks lattes cost $10 a pop, but everybody's wages doubled, it would be no big deal. Nothing would matter. But if the prices of things doubled and everybody's wages remained the same, then we would notice that inflation. That goes back to like the expected inflation. So, here's a hard new thing. Very conceptual. In the long run, which doesn't really exist, in the long run, over, I don't know, a 10-year contract expires, and people change their behaviors and everything. There's some output level which indicates the full employment of all workers, of all resources. Potential output. Sometimes this could be like Y1. Sometimes Y is the letter used to show output. And as the price level changes, it's the long run. As the price level changes, wages change instantaneously. Okay, not instantaneously, but over 25 or 30 or 100 or a million years. And this is called the long run aggregate supply. This is the output where price doesn't matter because once wages adjust, if the price of everything goes up by 3 and wages go up by 3, it's really indifferent. Long run aggregate supply. And this is a fully conceptual construct.
What's the graph that you did on the bottom saying?
This is that production possibility curve. And it's just saying we're here and not there.
And not where?
Like inside of it with like unemployed resources is what we called that like a couple weeks ago. This is just like possible like things that you could produce. So I just drew an arbitrarily placed aggregate demand point. And we have a corresponding output. That corresponding output is less than our potential output. Called a recessionary gap. If a recessionary gap exists, we are not reaching, the economy is not reaching potential output, and we're not at full employment. I wrote it nice and small so you can't see it. Unemployment exists. That's cyclical unemployment. If you talk about different types of unemployment, that's cyclical unemployment. The step for the
know something? I love middle school.
Oh, that was
That was fun.
What?
Yeah,
that was the bell.
That was the bell for today. They did that during Christmas
That's
too.
dope.
The bell was like Christmas music inside. Alright. Cool.
Just make sure.
That's awful.
That'd be awkward.
Very cold for today. It's food.
And
I don't have any transition back. I have one, but it's not.
I just want to call it there.
Speaking of kung fu pandas, employment.
There are a lot of reasons why recessionary gaps exist. We're going to talk about some towards the end of class. But we're equipped right now to say, well, if there is a recessionary gap and unemployment exists, what could we do?
Make the
It's a great idea. How are we going to do that? Jack, what do you want to do?
Trying to shift the aggregate demand
How?
by doing one of the fiscal policy things,
Like what?
like decreasing taxes.
Okay. So, Jack, running for Congress or something is saying, I think we should lower taxes to get us out of the recession. That's going to increase consumption and hopefully shift aggregate demand. Anyone else want to do something?
I want to build a fence for my military.
He wants to build a fence for his military, government spending.
Okay, sure. A fence works too, yeah.
You
What did you say, defense or?
You said build a fence.
I said build defense.
Oh, I think you said build a
But that's,
fence.
yeah, no, build a
I
fence
heard
works
build
too.
a fence.
Build a fence would work to increase aggregate demand because we have to buy the plastic from somewhere. Offensive military, like Space Wars.
Yeah. All around.
Space
Is he on Reddit that do sex thing?
And what would happen? Again, in this theoretical construct,
It would move.
GDP would move.
and it wouldn't have the possibility of becoming the
Going to its full
LRA.
towards the long run aggregate supply. Towards full employment. And this idea of potential output. That's 1 week's worth of macroeconomics.
Okay.
Two doors down, I teach a middle school stock market elective. And the concept of the stock market is if you take any time in the past, over some decent amount of time, output, GDP, stock prices, whatever you want to call it, are higher. But it doesn't constantly go there like linearly. Over time, and normally they're in like 10-year intervals. What's called business cycles. And then even within this business cycle, from day to day, there are like ups and downs from like whims of people, and this is what you see on like the stock market, are like, you know what, I'm not gonna buy a car today. This is like you have a business cycle. Peak. Trough. Are legit vocab words. Here's the idea of what happens. The numbers here, why don't you pause on writing this? Just because the numbers matter way less than the concept, I think you'll get the concept. In 2017, you can convert this into millions, billions, trillions, 800s, whatever. 50 cars were made. People wanted 75 cars. As any smart business person would do, this person opens up a new factory. It's not easy to do. You need money. In order to do that, take out a loan. But they were able to make 100 cars. Take out a loan. 75 were demanded. There were 25 left over, but those 25 satisfied these people. Right, because there were 25 people at the end of the year who were like, I want a car. Then in 2019, we have these two places. 75 more people want a car. What's left in our inventory? 25 cars. We have some extra cars left over in our inventory. How many cars should we make?
50.
So, in order to make 50, what do you need to do? Close a factory. What happens to the people that work at that factory? So,
Why did the demand go down?
the demand was 75 the whole time.
No, but wouldn't it go down if they don't have money?
Oh, that's what's going to happen in 21.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you don't even want to. It gets rough. in 21. You know what I'm saying? As far as the workforce goes.
And maybe we lay some of those people off.
It's just a slaughterhouse.
But over time, cars break down.
23.
So
Going back up.
we need more cars.
But they only make.
Back, baby.
So there's 0.
We need another factory.
10 pent up demand. We make more.
Oh, we're back, baby.
We're back.
And then cycle all the way back through. We open up a new plant.
Woo!
Oh, you know what I forgot here? When we're only making 25, we're still paying off the debt from when we expanded. That's this business cycle. Hey, this is great. There's so much excitement. We're overproducing. We're lending out credit. We're taking credit. We're building new factories. Yay, we're producing like a little too much. Why do we have recessions in this cycle? Because we get so excited here, and then, whoops, we have to pay that debt off. And there's some people that were like, maybe I couldn't afford a car here. And so whatever they do. Say what? Australia hasn't had a recession in like, I don't know, 50 years or something.
and
But then all of a sudden there's like pent up demand. people need cars, or I don't know, maybe this is like these are additions and construction work and like new houses and like the listener place. And then there's like too much left over in inventory, so we produce less and to lay people off, and then they don't demand as much, and it's cyclical. But then, well, you have to have your roof done eventually. You have to work on the roads eventually.
Are there any industries that are like constant?
Yeah.
Like have constant
Recession, it's called recession-proof industries, like diapers, some food, not all food.
Essential food,
Potatoes.
like milk.
So potatoes might even be like opposite of recessionary, that like when things are going well, no one buys potatoes.
Why isn't that about
Why?
Because it's like considered like
We
a
do so much
plain-ish.
Yeah.
People are
Potatoes would be
spending money on
generous.
avocados.
Avocados, though.
Right,
That's
that's
Florida luxury.
Yeah, Florida.
Yeah, if you remember
Arizona.
from AP Micro, substitutes and complements
Yeah.
Pumpkin soup.
Pumpkin soup.
and all of these things. That's my brief explanation, it's on video and everything, of why we have these business cycles.
Are we gonna get the kung fu fighting on video as well? That little
We can check. I'm not sure if it picked it up. I'm mic'd here and I don't know if it picked it up. I think it's on mute anyway, so this might be just all on mute. So, we still have this theoretical construct of what we could be able to supply. Think like, I don't know, 1945, like all hands on deck. We're making as many machines as possible. Thinking something like that. And here's aggregate supply with sticky wages and sticky prices.
Someone spilled juice on the wages.
There you have it. But we're at one of those peaks. We're at one of those business cycle peaks. And there's a ton of demand. People want more. More everything. There's so much demand. People are taking out credit. People are taking out student loans. People are taking loans on their loans. It's called an inflationary gap. Most economists think that right now in the United States, because if you look at the fiscal policy list, government spending, taxes, business incentives, all three of those have been Trump policies that have pushed aggregate demand. What is not agreed upon by economists is where long-run aggregate supply is. Maybe because over the last 20 years we have a smarter workforce. Maybe because of automation, artificial intelligence, we're just able to produce more. So our potential output might actually be somewhere crazy, like way out there. There's not consensus there. I think that this is further out than textbooks that were written in 2005. If I were going to study economics in college, I think I might have told you all this. I would go in with like, wait, how has this changed in the last like 5 or 10 years? And that would be my perspective through like all of my coursework. We talked about frictional unemployment. I think frictional unemployment is like crazy low relative to what economists estimated frictional unemployment in like 1980. We definitely talked about this in here because I was like, oh, you have to type up on a typewriter your resume and bring it down to the copy place and then hand deliver it. And You didn't like apply for jobs, and so that might be like an antiquated concept. Long run aggregate supply being here, well, what would shift long run aggregate supply? What would make us, and just ignore the aggregate supply, aggregate demand short run for a minute? What would make that shift further out? Smarter workforce, a bigger workforce. Thinking like immigration policy. More automation, more tasks. I don't have to go, I did my grocery shopping in like 5 minutes today by going onto Wegmans' website and having it delivered this evening. That makes me 1 hour more productive, because it takes me an hour to go grocery shopping. That, if I use that to make more education content, it would shift how much I am able to produce. Also, like if a machine is working 24/7, think of like a job of like an assembly line, someone putting the tires on a car, but now there's like laser pointers and weight sensor and zzz, zzz. Now that's working, a machine is doing it 24/7, that would increase our potential output. Do you have a question?
No, I just couldn't refresh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, if this was the agreed upon situation by the President's Council of Economic Advisors, they might want to pull back on the reins. That's a horse riding analogy, to slow down. By raising taxes, by decreasing government spending, by disincentivizing investment and production. I don't think that you'd hear any politicians say that, though. They'd probably say, look at that growth, more and more and more. One piece I didn't mention about fiscal policy, and that's where these like models, one of the major issues is what's called lag. You may notice that when you play the Fortnite, and you're like, I'm hitting the up button, but I'm not going up. Does that ever happen to you? Okay, when you're playing Madden and you're like, B is open, B is open. You hit the B button, but nothing happens because you got crazy lag. Yeah, and then boom, pick 6. Okay. Lag. By the time, so Jack was running for Congress, he said, I'm going to lower taxes to increase our GDP. Okay. Skylar votes for him, he's in. But, ask any of the newly elected Democratic Congress people from this most recent congressional class, and their policies don't happen right away. Even if everybody agreed on a policy, taxes, income taxes, are due April 20th. You can't tell me on February 5th that my taxes for 2018 are going to be more or less. I already made all my decisions for 2018. You can barely tell me for 2019 what the tax policy is going to be. So by the time you get agreement, by the time a bill becomes a law, by the time it's enacted, those things take a lot of time. Yeah, I think you had said you wanted some more defense spending. All those planes are being built, the contracts have been signed with Boeing and whatnot. If you want to wind those down, that takes a long time. Companies make projections into the future. Now you're asking them to change all their projections and change everything immediately. That's the idea of, it's lag, but it's like the sticky prices, sticky everything, is that it takes time to change. One more really easy thing. Promise it's not that hard. Any question?
No, I was kind of just
Excitement? By some excitement in the world, there we are at our long run equilibrium. We're like Australia, who's just been cruising. What causes a recessionary gap? Like the last time, we just said we were there. I just said we were there. How do you get there? A demand shock or a supply shock. So a demand shock would be if for some reason people were like, you know what? I don't like technology anymore. There's a full backlash against technology. No iPhones, no Google Pixels, no Google searching, no Amazons. People just went back to like farming their own stuff. That would significantly decrease aggregate demand.
Wouldn't it also decrease supply? Like as a result of the decrease?
So over time, yes. But Apple is producing phones right now for phones that aren't even sold yet. So instantaneously, or in like the short run, aggregate demand changing would cause a recessionary gap. A major creator of supply shock, of recessionary gaps are supply shocks. You could think of this as aggregate supply moving to the left, or you could think of aggregate supply moving up, which would mean more expensive. One example could be an increased minimum wage. Across the United States, the minimum wage has to be $15. Well, all the suppliers, things are going to be more expensive. Higher price for all inputs. What about like steel? All of a sudden we used to import steel from China, now it takes even more money to do that. Weather. Major hurricanes, nothing's able to be produced in Florida or California, earthquakes or something.
Sorry, why would an increase in minimum wage make supply
'Cause-
go down?
Think of aggregate supply as going left or up. That would be increasing how much it costs per worker. Oh, and the other part is just government intervention. Increasing business taxes. Oh, those companies like Amazon, Apple, and Google make so much money. We should make them fund public education, so we're going to tax them 10% more and put all that money towards education. That would increase the cost per company, increase aggregate supply, and create a recessionary gap. Oh no, we have a recessionary gap. What could we do to fix this recessionary gap? There's unemployment.
Fiscal policy.
Fiscal policy, what do you want to do, Morgan?
Increase government spending.
Increase government spending.
Build fences. Fences.
Okay. Look, somehow we did it exactly perfectly. Wow. So we went from here back to this long run equilibrium. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. What happened at the price level? Yeah, what's that called? And if wages are sticky, that's no good. Things cost more, but we're not getting paid the same. And also, as being sticky, if prices double and wages, I don't know, go up by 1.5 times, we still didn't match. inflation. Inflation's not bad for everybody. This is like review. Inflation's not bad for borrowers because if you have $100,000 that you owe in student loans and the price of everything goes up 4 times, your student loan still stays at $100,000. You owe what seems to be less. There are a couple resources through the Khan Academy that are on our Canvas page that are not on one of your checklists yet. There's like a 15-minute video about like historical context of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Like, what happened in the Great Depression? Was that a decrease in aggregate demand or was that a decrease in aggregate supply? What happened after World War II? Was that an increase in aggregate demand or an increase in aggregate supply? Those are important pieces to get context. You have a couple of comprehension checks for this week. There are 3 videos. One on aggregate demand, one on aggregate supply, one on long-run aggregate supply, which are essentially exactly what I talked about, but you could pause it. You can make sure it jives with your notes. There's also an Albert I.O. 15-question check. Just practice, graded for both accuracy and completion. What?
So it is for accuracy, so it's not for practice then. Okay.
So I expect that you get higher than 20%, because if you just hit A for everyone, you would get 20%, 1 out of 5. I don't expect you to get more than 75%, because they're really hard.
Okay.
If you get 30%, I'm going to be like, feels like McKee probably just hit A for everything and like got lucky once. If you get 100% because you like look up the answers, totally good. No, I'm just saying, like, that's part of it, but that's going to take a long time. Right? First period Thursday is F block. Second to last period Friday. Next Tuesday is the next time that we meet in here. It's the long block, and it will be review. It's optional. Nah, it's not optional. You have to be here. But you can leave early. For an end-of-day Wednesday quiz. In-person quiz. The quiz will be like a 20-minute quiz. 30-minute quiz.
Like the first one.
Say what?
Like the first one.
Yeah. And then we have the long weekend. And then we come back with what's called monetary policy, which coincides with fiscal policy, but without the government. Oh, the other part that stinks about the fiscal policy is Jack's already running for re-election, and he's trying to push better fiscal policies, but it might not be better for us. But fiscal policies are at the whim of politicians. Look out in the State of the Union. You get extra credit if you find out fiscal policy in the State of the Union. Tonight. I don't know. You don't have to watch it as like part of your work for other classes?
No.
What do you mean?